Welcome to Rook's Health. Today we're going to be going over the documents required for a health and care workers visa. These are the documents you will require if you're going to be putting together an application for a health and social care visa, which is a subset under the skilled workers visa, specifically for health and social care workers looking to gain full employment in the UK, mostly in the NHS or NHS sponsored employers. Now, I've covered this very much in depth in other videos, so I won't go over them too much now. We're just going to do an overview of certain documents, both the core as well as the additional. Both are just as important depending on your scenario, but let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the video of the specific document you require. Number one, which is your knowledge of English. Your knowledge of English is proof of your knowledge of English, as it says. Now, I've covered this in a previously separate video, but this more or less is things like your IELTS, your transcriptions of your previous degree from a different country to show that it meets the English level requirements of this country, which is UK. But for individuals who are already in the UK, for example, doing a bachelor's, master's program, any form of study, lawfully as well, you don't need to then basically show your proof of English. You would just be able to carry over that because your degree was taught in English. But there's not much more to say about that. It's just proof of English, and depending on where you're from, you might need to show proof of English, or you might not need to show proof of English, depending on if you're outside or inside the country already at the time. There's different ones. If you are on a visiting visa, I suspect you will still need to show proof of English if you have not actually gotten your full degree here in the UK, but you're just visiting and you're trying to get through it, because most likely you need to go back to the country initially and then apply from there anyway. But let's move on to the next point. Number two is more or less a valid passport or any other way to show your identity and your nationality. Normally this is a valid passport, meaning one that is not expired, because you need to provide your passport number in your application. And as well, you don't want to be using one that's expiring in a couple weeks, because if there are delays to your application or delays to the entire process, you're going to basically have an expired passport, apply for a new one, and it will just cause a bit of conflict that probably is not necessary and that can be avoided. So if ideally use a valid passport, if your passport is expiring soon, try and renew it early enough, so give yourself enough time. If you've already submitted and something's happened and things have changed, it's not the end of the world. All you can need to do is just inform the Home Office, inform your employer of change of circumstances, meaning maybe your passport's lost and this is your new passport. There are systems in place, so you don't have to then get your application rejected and start over, but it's all about timing. So that's more or less a simple one, your passport, valid national passport. Now we get on to the third one, which is a certificate of sponsorship letter and the information inside that letter. I've covered this extensively on previous videos where I talk about what it should look like, what it should have on it. But the core ones that you need to know that it should have on your certificate of sponsorship letter that are in line with the government website are your certificate of sponsorship special and specific reference number, meaning that this is the number assigned to your specific case. It should have that. It should have your job title and your job occupation code, as well as your name on it as well, which seems very straightforward already. But also it should have your employer's sponsorship license number. This is the number that they are registered under with the government to show that they are able to sponsor visas. Now that's why you're able to check on a long list of different trusts and employers to see who actually sponsor. Each trust or each employer has their own specific license number that has to be valid, so you should have all this information on it. But the one bonus thing I can say is you can actually just check your job occupation code on the government website. I'll leave a link to that in the description, but I've covered that in a previous video where you can see what specific number it is, if it's 0202, whatever it is for your specific occupation, just if you wanted to do a little bit of due diligence and make sure that it marries up to what's been printed on your job contract as well as your cost letter. But that's more or less that about the cost letter. I'm not going to talk about it more. Okay, and there are the three, well, more than three, but the three core parts of the application that those are the must-haves. Now we're going to go into the where it becomes you might need some of these, you most likely will need some, but you don't need some. These are the additional documents depending on your circumstance that you will need for your application as well. Number one major one is your evidence of finances. Now this one I've covered as well in a separate video, but it is more or less showing proof that you have enough money to staying when you come to the UK, survive for the first few months, pay application fees, pay any other outstanding fees that are required for this, except it is exclusively stated on your cost letter, we are going to be providing X amount of support for this person for relocation, for X, Y, and Z. If it's not, then there are set amounts you have to show in your account, and it has to be there for a certain amount of time. I've covered this in a separate video more in depth, where you can look at the specific numbers and see how much you have to have in your account, because this is one element that tends to delay people's application, because that money may already be in your account, but it's not been within the time frame that you need to be able to put through a successful application. But that is one key element of it. Another one is a criminal record certificate. Now, depending on where you're coming from, that's why I said this is where it gets to very dependent on where you are. So I strongly recommend you have a look at the documents below as well. So depending on where you're from or where you're coming from, you will need to provide a criminal background check record certificate. If you're already in the UK, setting jobs, for example, I was already a healthcare student studying physiotherapy. I did not need to, because I already done a DBS check with my university, and my employer was going to do a DBS check anyway as well. A DBS check is just another form of criminal background check that they do here in the UK before you apply to certain jobs. Certain jobs need it, certain jobs don't. You can check that as well below, and I'll try and put it on the screen now as well. But if you're coming from abroad, you most likely may have to provide a separate one from wherever you're coming from, just to show your criminal record in that country. If it's nothing, then you just provide that certificate depending on where you're coming from as well. The laws may vary, sometimes a lot harder, sometimes it's easier to get it from certain countries, but that's more or less the gist of that part. Okay, another one is your tuberculosis test. Okay, now again, very common theme. Some countries need a tuberculosis test to show proof that you do not have TB, and you will need to provide that within a time frame gotten from a credible and often, registered source within your country that can actually be carried over to the embassy to say, this is it, this is my evidence, I don't have tuberculosis. Some countries need that evidence, some countries do not. So make sure to check the list of countries that need a tuberculosis test before you make your application, or just to know. Sometimes you might not need it, but if you need it, it's better to have it than not in that specific scenario, because I know these things need to be booked ahead in advance and they might take time. So it all comes into play with your planning. Most likely, if you're already in the UK, I didn't need to prove one while I was already here because I was only switching my visa. There is a quick one I wanted to touch on that I'm no specialist in, or I have no very significant knowledge in particularly, which is proof of partners, which is bringing your daughter, your children, or your spouse across with you. This is not my area of specialty, but this is another element that can be looked into much further. I need to do some research into it, but there need to be considerations into that. You need to show proof of that connection as well. That's all I'll say on it at this time. But if most people want me to do it, I will look and do research and find people who have gone through this process and try and have them on the channel to talk through that process as well. And the final one is your UK PhD certificate, or if you are applying from an outside country, you need to go through ECTIS, which is a whole separate program and a whole separate thing. Basically, it helps you show and get you formalized your degree abroad to the standards here. But that's a whole separate thing that you will need. Not many people will be going down that route, but if you are, that's extra information for you as well. And that is more or less all for the video today. Again, this was just a very brief summary touching on the points to make you aware. If you're making a list, you can just write down all those little points. I still recommend you go through the actual government website document in more depth and look through your own specific circumstances to make sure that you're not missing out any documents you are supposed to be providing. This is just a rundown to get you familiarized so that when you're thinking of either applying for the job, or you're going to get the job particularly, or in the future, you are already prepared with all these other things that might add 1 month, 2 months. For example, your cost letter might take 3 months, 2 weeks, 6 months, it varies, but you don't want any other thing to be limiting your whole application process while you're waiting, for example, the cost letter. You want to make sure everything else is fine and you're ready to go as soon as all documents are ready. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care of yourself. We'll see you in the next one.